Hello, welcome to the Health Paradigm Healthy Lifestyle Interview Podcast show. With us today, we have Roger Meacock, who is the official UK distributor of Comosystems in the UK. Comosystems specializes in EMF protection products, and Roger is here today with us to talk about Comosystems and how their products could help you. A very warm welcome to you, Roger.
Thanks, Gina. Thank you.
So you, by profession, are a vet.
Yes.
A veterinarian, you're a vet. And you are now involved with EMF protection products. How did that happen? What made you get involved with this?
Yeah, it's sort of a long story, really. I started off, I qualified as a vet and was working very conventionally, and through a series of events ended up getting involved with some products that were doing magnetherapy, and I was initially trying to prove that they didn't work and found that they did. So I got into frequency and then started researching myself to understand how frequency can affect the body and how it could be used for healing. Primarily was my original direction. And about the same time in the 1990s, Roger Coghill took one of the mobile phone companies to court. He was accusing them of creating harm with their mobile phones. And that sort of made me realize that, you know, if you can use frequency for healing, if you can use frequency in a bad direction or overexpose, then it can create harm as well. So that sort of got me interested in the whole frequency aspect. I became aware of EMFs, artificial electromagnetic radiation, and the potential damage that it does to the body. And so I was sort of aware of that problem for a number of years. And it wasn't really until 2 or 3 years ago when I got introduced to Comosystems as a company, and was researching them and was talking to them, and they were telling me all about their research, that I realized that, you know, this was a company that I was happy to get involved with, to introduce to my clients within my practice. And then they asked me to become the UK and Ireland distributor, and it just seemed like a good idea. So, you know, I came at this whole EMF and frequency idea really from the clinical point of view, and then sort of added the business bit on at the end, really.
Very interesting story. Could you give us some background information on Comosystems and the technology and what the company essentially does?
Yes, Comosystems as a company they developed the technology for quite a long time. They were started off in France by Maurice Fillon-Robin, who had a background in pharmaceuticals, actually. And then when quantum physics started sort of hitting the mainstream or becoming a bit more better known, he sort of got into that idea. He saw it as a scientist, and so he was quite keen to sort of pursue that, which obviously didn't really fit in very well with the pharmaceutical industry that he was in. And he was also became aware, because of the dangers of VDUs, visual display units to begin with. He was concerned about the effects of energy on people who were working on computers the whole time, and it was becoming a lot more popular in those days as well. So he decided to look into it, really from a quantum physics point of view and a vibrational energy point of view, but also with his background in pharmaceuticals. He really wanted to, you know, find a solution to the problem as he perceived it, but do it in a way that was accepted, or would be acceptable, as he hoped, to sort of, you know, the mainstream science, by, you know, doing some proper research, finding out what the problems were, and then developing some kit to help to solve those problems, but then also proving them in a way that would be acceptable to, you know, to science as well, because he felt that if it couldn't be proven, then who was going to take any notice of it, or who was going to take it seriously?
Absolutely.
So he really came from that background and an angle, which was which was great, really.
But there are a few other scientists that are involved in the development of Comosystems as well.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, he partnered with some of the top scientists in the field, sort of Vladimir Bini, who was at the Russian Academy of Sciences, who actually wrote the book on magnetobiology. So, everybody knows about biochemistry. Very few people have heard of biophysics, and even in quantum physics, quantum biology, even less. So, Vladimir Bini is really at the forefront of the understanding of how frequency and how vibration and magnetic fields affect the body, affect our cells. So, Maurice sort of partnered up with some really high-level scientists to put the technology together and work out what the problem was and how to solve it.
So they specialize in products, EMF technology. And they have come up with a concept. Well, they've called themselves Como, but they've come up with a compensating magnetic oscillator, which is the technology behind their devices.
That's right. Yeah, it sounds very complicated, and it's not really. It's just using the very well known and proven phenomenon of resonance. So it's a little bit like if you've got a tuning fork, or you've got two tuning forks in a room. If you strike one and make it ring, it will just set off a resonant frequency in the other tuning fork, and it will start ringing as well. And really, that's what's happening with the compensating magnetic oscillator technology. Is it gets struck, if you like, by the electromagnetic radiation. It sets up a vibration within the CMO technology, which is the resonant frequency of the biological processes within the body that get disrupted by the electromagnetic radiation. And so what it does is that resonance reinforces the signal, and that basically stabilizes all the processes that get disrupted. So the CMO technology isn't interfering with electromagnetic radiation. So people take a meter and try and see if there's a difference with and without the technology. There won't be one, because we're not interfering with the technology. What we're doing is introducing a mitigating signal that allows the body to do its own thing and do it properly. So that's really an important difference from a lot of how a lot of the other technologies might claim to work.
So you're saying essentially that the compensating magnetic oscillator works on sympathetic resonance. So
yes.
it becomes activated when it's in range of EMFs, it becomes activated, yes. And then it then emits a counter signal to the body to harmonize the body.
Exactly. So we're normalizing what goes on in the body. We're not affecting the signal that's the electromagnetic radiation. So we're not interfering with someone's ability to use their phone or their laptop or their Wi-Fi or whatever else, the benefits that they want to get from that electromagnetic radiation. But what we're doing is we're basically allowing that to work with the body and not to cause any harm.
Yes, I want to talk about the adverse effects of EMFs and the effects that they have on the body. And also you were talking about natural EMFs and then artificial EMFs.
That's right. Yeah. When I'm talking about electromagnetic radiation, I'm primarily talking about artificial radiation, electromagnetic radiation, because of course we have natural frequencies from the sun, from cosmic rays, and even Schumann resonances from the Earth as well. So, we have evolved to live within electromagnetic radiation, but there's a difference between what's natural and the artificial ones. So that's the problem, really. So we've got sort of natural EMFs they're polarized, and they're very much what we call analog. So they're quite smooth. If we go into artificial radiation, especially the later digital ones, then they are polarized, which means that they vibrate in a certain plane, and that isn't natural. The body hasn't evolved to interact with those. And and so that's a problem. And then now when we've gone digital, they're very pulsed. So we get very high peaks and spikes of signal, and then sudden drops, which is very low. So it's a little bit like, let's have a think about the analogy. Okay, so if you're sitting by a waterfall, the water's pouring over this waterfall, and it's actually quite relaxing because there's all sorts of different frequencies together. There's sort of a predictability about the sound as it comes over the waterfall. And then if you contrast that with the old Chinese water torture, where you've got a dripping tap, which may or may not be at a regular frequency. And because you can't predict when it's going to happen, and because it's a very sudden pulse, it becomes quite irritating. It can actually sort of turn people mad. So it's a little bit like, that's what the artificial EMFs do in the body compared to the natural radiation that we evolved to live in. So when it's comes in a form that the body hasn't evolved, then we can't really adapt to it. And because the increase in electromagnetic radiation has happened so quickly, really within sort of the last generation or so, it's not long enough for the body to have evolved in. And also because of the suddenness of the digital frequencies and pulses, again, it's not something the body can adapt to, because there's no predictability about it. And that's because the body can't adapt to it. That's what then allows the adverse effects that happen within the body, and that there's a variety of those that happen as well.
But now it started off with 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now there's 5G.
Yes.
So the technology has evolved, and we are now at a stage of, well, I think right now we're at the lower end of 5G, which will then evolve to a higher frequency of 5G eventually.
Yes.
So because that technology has developed, that means the adverse effects on the body are stronger.
Yeah,
Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fact that we've increased it so much more as well. I mean, if you just as sort of an example, so we've evolved in natural radiation, and if we now look at how much artificial radiation there is now compared with that background radiation that we're involved with, that is now 1 quintillion times more, which sounds like a very large number, and it is, because it's a 1 with 18 zeros afterwards. So it's that massive increase in the exposure levels is part of the problem. And with 5G, it's not just another level of mobile phones. The talk of 5G is more about the Internet of Things. It's not the mobile phones, it's just a very small aspect of it. And so the increase or the step up from say 1G to 2G or 2G to 3G is nothing compared with the step up we're going to get from 4G to 5G once it's completely rolled out. And really, the reason why that is happening and why it's going to be allowed is by going into the higher frequencies. It allows so much more information to be broadcast and downloaded and transferred around together. So before, in the lower generations of mobile phones, we were sort of limited by the bandwidth and by how much information could be carried at one time. And now we've gone up to going up to the higher frequencies, that ability to carry so much more information is, it's just a huge step up. And it is that massive increase in information that's coming into the body that is also, more disruptive to the body in 5G compared to the lower generation, even 4G itself. So it's a different beast altogether in terms of the different generations of mobile technology.
So let's now talk about the specific effects, the specific adverse effects these EMFs have on the body. And One of the main things that Comosystems talks about is voltage-gated calcium channel disruption as being one of the main things, your calcium ions being affected by this EMF. So please tell us more about that.
Sure, sure. If people can remember back to some of their, their school biology, they'll remember that there's an action or a voltage potential difference across the cell wall, and that is maintained by the movement of ions in and out of cells. So it's really important if we're trying to maintain health that we maintain that voltage difference between the inside and the outside of the cell. And that means that the ions have to flow without being disrupted, and they've got to be at the right concentrations. So you've got a cell membrane around all the cells, obviously, and there are proteins and what's called gates within the membrane, which controls the flow of the ions across from the outside into the cell and from the inside out as well. So those channels are very important in terms of how they help the cells to structure. And there are two types of gates. One is just called a ligand gate, and that basically just allows fairly free flow of ions in and out of the cells. And then we've got what's called voltage gated calcium ion channels. So the voltage gated means that they are very much more controlled by the voltage difference and by influences on the cell. So if we take, for example, the calcium channel, the sort of voltage gated calcium channel, so there's a higher level of calcium outside the cell, and they're held by proteins. So what happens with the EMF disruption is it changes the electron spin of the calcium ions, and that in turn disrupts how they're being held by the protein. So they then get released when they shouldn't otherwise be released, and they flood into the cells through these voltage-gated calcium channels. And when the levels of calcium in the cells increase as they do, that sets up a whole sort of chain, a cascade, if you like, of it that results in inflammation, free radical damage, which damages the DNA, disrupts hormones, and all sorts of various different things. So the voltage-gated calcium channels have really been centered on in terms of how the main effect of electromagnetic radiation on the body sort of initiates everything, and specifically the calcium ones. And that's sort of been proven by Professor Martin Pall of Washington State University. And what he discovered was that if you use pharmaceuticals, which are calcium channel blockers, which are often used for treating heart disease, when he had people who had electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which is people who are very sensitive to the effects of electromagnetic radiation, he found that he could block those symptoms if he put them on this heart medication, on the calcium channel blockers. So he proved really that was the main way, as he understood it, that electromagnetic radiation was causing these effects and the symptoms that people get from electromagnetic radiation in the body. So that's where the ion channels and specifically the calcium ones are very important. But calcium isn't the only ion channel that's disrupted, as you might imagine. There are all sorts of different voltage-gated ion channels, all of which can equally be disrupted at certain resonant frequencies to those ions and the proteins within the gates as well. So different frequencies might have more of an effect on some of the different ions, but we've got now so many more different frequencies and so much more radiation, and it's all pretty well cumulative, that all the voltage-gated ion channels are really being adversely affected.
Okay, that's really interesting. Talking about the calcium channels and other ions in your body. So these are real things that are happening in the body. It's not just a theory. It's an actual scientific proven thing that EMFs do affect the voltage gated ions in the body, which then would encourage inflammation, which then can be a slippery road to lots of different things.
Yeah,
Ultimately.
absolutely. And some of the regulations are set up whereby they look at what they consider to be the safety levels based on an assumption which is years old and has never been updated despite all the research, which says that you can only get biological disruption happening if the EMFs cause a thermal effect, i.e. it causes heat within the body.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it logically, it just doesn't make sense, because our cells are communicating with each other in the body. We've got, we're talking and understanding a lot more now about the microbiome, whereby, of our human organism, if you like, only 10% of us are actually human cells. Another 90% is sort of little microbes, which are important to our immune system. And our gut microbiome is now being linked to mental health and all sorts of effects around the body. And yet those microbes aren't causing heating effects by communicating with each other and with our human cells. So the idea that EMFs can only disrupt biology by having a heating effect is just so illogical. It's really laughable. It doesn't make sense with how we know the rest of the body communicates with itself.
Yeah, but that's the thing that most of the scientists actually focus on, are the thermal effects, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, there's a small body who have latched onto that, and there are a large number of scientists who have proven otherwise, but they're just being ignored. And there's obviously vested interests, unfortunately, coming into play here. It all sounds a little bit conspiracy theory, but unfortunately, there's a huge amount of money involved in the telecoms and the electronics and everything, and especially the Internet of Things coming through. That there's a cognitive dissonance now that's resulting in these scientists ignoring the weight of evidence that's saying that EMFs cause harm at non-thermal effects. And we've also got to bear in mind that as an organism, as a being, we aren't linear. And by that I mean you don't get a straight line effect in terms of how something can influence the body. So for example, if you've got an enzyme which is being disrupted by the EMFs, that enzyme will have maybe a function in how a hormone functions. So if you disrupt that enzyme, it processes molecules millions of times a second. So all of a sudden you're getting a massive amplification of how the effects of the body is influenced by these EMFs, compared to, well, if it just moves a couple of extra ions across the membrane, you might think, well, that doesn't sound very much. But when you sort of think of, well, if that starts affecting how our enzymes function, or how our hormones function, or whether DNA is being replicated properly, then there's sort of a multiplication factor, an exponential factor, logarithmic really, sort of coming into play here, where you can see that actually very low level of influence can have potentially very serious effects on the body, especially if, going back to that example of DNA damage, if the wrong genes or the wrong chromosome gets damaged at the wrong gene, then that might be enough to switch on cancer or some sort of really serious condition, autoimmune or anything like that. So it's not a simple case of low is safe and high is dangerous. There are other things in play here, and different resonant frequencies of different ions will mean you'll have windows of frequency which will cause more harm, and you can go either side of that window and there'll be less. So it's not a linear system that we've got to think about at all. The biology doesn't work in that way, even if maybe the physics side of it may work a little bit more on a linear scale. How it affects the body and how the biology works is very, very much non-linear.
Mm-hmm. So to mitigate that, Comosystems have developed technology to help counter the effects of EMF. So I would like to talk a little bit more about the actual Comosystems technology and the products that
Sure.
that are available that people could use that could help them. And
Yeah.
also I'd like to talk about, because I have a traveler myself. I just want to tell everybody I have a traveler myself. I own a Harmony. And I love this. It's absolutely amazing. I can feel with the Traveler, because it's a portable device. The first time I opened the box, I put it in the palm of my hand. I could detect a current. I could feel the vibration, like something was going on. I felt the energy. So something's in there. Could you tell us that I read on your website that the actual technology is a liquid crystalline solution? Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of crystalline solution inside the CMO technology is actually a very physiological solution itself. It's got lots of different trace elements and minerals and things in it. So they are all have got their ability to resonate when they're agitated as well. And then there's a sort of a programming frequency which is then put into that crystalline solution which resonates out, and it sounds it is all sort of very quantum physics, and it has been measured. So although it looks just like a cone, or I'll show you some of the products in a second, they all do resonate and they do put out a signal, and it has been measured by a device called a super quantum interference device, which is a SQUID for short. And so the signal that comes out, the mitigating signal, is around the 12 hertz, but the power is like 150 femtotesla. So again, such a low level of power. That's the sort of power level, magnetic field power level that cells communicate with each other. So people aren't going to be able to put a meter by the devices and try and measure anything. It took it going into a special room which is a part of this super quantum interference device, where it's encased in what's called mu metal, so that no other signals can come in. And that's, you've really got to have very controlled conditions in order to identify the signal, unless of course you're as sensitive as you, Jane. And there are a few people who can feel the signal. It's not something I can claim to do. Maybe I'll develop it as time goes by, but there are people who will pick it up and straight away they'll go, oh yes, I can feel this. So people are able to detect it, not just in terms that it reduces their symptoms, but they can actually feel the signal coming out. So if we start off with the Traveler, I'll hold mine up, just taking it off me. So this is what one looks like.
Could you, I can't, yeah, if you could just put it slightly to the right. Yes, that's better. Yeah.
In front of me, then the green screen thing behind me won't block it out. So that's a little Traveler. I mean, it basically, as you see, it comes with a clip, and you can put it onto a belt, or just keep it in a pocket, wherever it stays on your person. It's a personal protection device, and it's got a field of influence of about 1.5 meters in all directions from it. So as long as you've got it on you or very close to you, it will be, protecting you from the electromagnetic radiation. So it's the sort of device, if someone lives on their own, then it's very good if they want to carry it around the house the whole time, but also then protects when they go outside. And yeah, and especially people in cars. I mean, cars are little Faraday cages. So all the electromagnetic radiation and electronics we've got in cars these days, it doesn't escape. And as we drive around, our mobile signals start powering up, trying to find the strongest signal that they possibly can. And so, being in a car, if you've got your mobile phone switched on and able to receive, so that you can talk on hands-free, or use it for streaming music, or whatever you want, or listen to the radio, whatever you want to do, then being inside a car with that on, is probably one of the strongest signal areas you can sort of generate within. Coming on to some of the cones, so I'll hold this in front of me again. Okay, so this is This is the Harmony. So this does a home or office, and it's just looks like it's a cone, and it basically puts out a field of influence, which is 5.5 meters in all directions. So if someone's got a fairly standard house, then you tend to put it sort of high up on the ground floor or low down on the first floor, and then that will do both floors. And of course, the main area that you want to cover is your main sleeping area, your bedrooms, and also your main living area. So you just sort of place it strategically to make sure that those areas are the two main areas which are covered. And if someone has got a larger house or office, there we go, move that there, we've got a gold coloured one which is bigger, and that puts out a field of influence which is 8 meters in all directions. That's 16 meters diameter. And again, you put it essentially to the areas that need to be covered as much as possible to cover primarily sleeping areas and work areas, because of course, and the sleeping areas is perhaps worth a little bit of extra note, because our body heals mostly at night.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why it heals mostly at night is because when everything's gone dark, it's because the sun is on the other side of the world. And so we haven't got all those EMFs from the sun, which are potentially interfering with our cellular communication that goes on in the body, which is part of the whole healing process. So nighttime is really that time of the day when we've really evolved to heal. And people are having mobile phones and technology in the bedroom, then that's really not good news. And although we promote the CMO technology to help to mitigate for all the signals, it really is a good idea to reduce your exposure as much as possible as well. It is important to give your body the maximum ability to heal as well as it possibly can at night time, especially. So we would always be advise people, even if they're using our technology, to keep technology out of the bedroom and be aware of of technology use and all the rest of it, because you don't need to take your body to the limits if you can help it.
I think if people just follow a very simple procedure of switching off their phones or switching onto airplane mode or switching off the Wi-Fi, that will help a lot, because the amount of people that just go to sleep without thinking of these things is unbelievable. Or they sleep with their phone next to their head.
Charging right next to their head.
Yeah, exactly, which is insane. It's criminal. Yeah. So just simple things can really help, switch off the Wi-Fi, don't charge your phone at your bed, and then have these devices, especially around the house and in your bedroom if you can.
Absolutely. I mean, it is really important to to minimize the signal, as I was saying. And it's a lot of the symptoms that people get are very sort of non-specific stress sort of symptoms. So headaches, eye strain, sort of thing where we often sort of write it off and go, oh, it's just modern life, stress of working, financial worries, all those sorts of things that just generally stress us out and create some sort of fairly low level but continuous symptoms. But that wears us down, and it means that things aren't quite right. Especially one of the big things that's disrupted is melatonin, which is the hormone that's involved for sleep. And if we aren't sleeping properly, we aren't healing properly, and then we're sort of on a gradual deterioration. And it's, I just sort of emphasize the effect of EMS, although some people feel them very quickly and are very sensitive to it. For the vast majority of people, these adverse effects that build up over a period of time. And for example, I think they did a study where they're looking at exposures for children, very young children. And it wasn't, they really didn't see the incidence or the increase in the incidence of cancers and other diseases until sort of they were 20 plus years old. So, some of the things that happen at very young ages, and obviously babies and children are very much more susceptible to the adverse effects of EMS, and I can talk a little bit more about that as to why. but they are that much more sensitive to the EMFs, and it will affect them later on in life, and they haven't got the wisdom or the knowledge to know what's good or what's bad. And it's up to us as adults to protect the next generation, and keep them as healthy as we possibly can.
Absolutely. And one of the best ways, like we said, following best practice, like switching off devices and things. But the other thing is investing in some of these really top products, Harmonies, Travelers, and even children can use them. They can put it on the backs, on their rucksacks going to school. So this is a very practical solution. A lot of parents can buy a Harmony for their house, so that's their house sorted out. And then
Yeah.
for their children, they can have a Harmony in their pocket, even at school, or on their rucksack or something.
They could have a traveler in their pockets, or the other thing, obviously, if they're using their parents, a lot of kids will borrow a mobile phone, and obviously as they get older, then they'll have their own mobile phone. But there is a device here. If I put it up in front of me, and then you can see it. This is what's called an easy call. It goes on the back of the mobile phone, and that just protects people who are using the mobile phone, but also carrying it, because you might use it when you're on a call away from your head, but then we put it in our pocket, so it's powering up and putting out the EMFs as we're walking around. And if kids are using them playing games or watching films, then obviously if it's resting on their body, even though they're not on a call as such, it's still putting out the EMF. So
Yeah.
the easy call on the mobile phone will help them for that. And there's a similar looking device that will go on the back of a tablet or a laptop, so that if people are, kids are using them resting on their body, then they'll be protected by that.
I just want to just make it clear for all the parents who are listening to this, that these devices do not need to be charged. They do not need to be cleared. They're self-clearing devices. There's no battery in any of them.
Yeah.
So they will last infinitely.
Absolutely. I mean, they've done some research where they repeated one of the research experiments at one of the independent laboratories, and found that even after 2 years, that they gave exactly the same results as they had previously. So there'd been no deterioration at all after 2 years. And then in-house, the company's detected some of has tested some of their original prototypes that they sort of made 15, 20 years ago. And they found again that they continue to work. So the signal itself works for years, as you say. There is a 2-year warranty put on the products, and that's really aimed because people will have maybe the easy call on their mobile phone, or they'll have the PC zone on their tablet or laptop, and everyday use, if people aren't very careful how they carry them around or move them around or put them down, then there's some workmanship that goes into those devices, and so they've got a 2-year warranty primarily for the workmanship, but the signal itself will, especially if they're looked after well, will last for many years.
That's fantastic. A very worthwhile investment, because you only have to buy it once. As long as you look after it, you'd only have to buy it once, and it will protect you. Let's talk more about, you were saying about children and case studies and examples, how this technology has helped with children, with people. Could you tell us more, Roger?
Yeah, I've got actually got sort of a friend of mine who they were living as families, uh, 2 adults and a baby, and they were living in the countryside, so they really didn't have very much exposure to EMFs at all. And then the property that they were renting got sold, so they had to move, and they went into town accommodation where they were surrounded by Wi-Fi signals and mobile phones, and it was a very different environment to where they started. And maybe the baby, she started showing sort of behavioral changes, wasn't sleeping so well, and so they got a Harmony for the house, and noticed that she was started sleeping better, and was just generally not quite so grumpy, and sort of all the sorts of adverse things that they'd noticed sort of normalized. And then Rich, actually, he's quite electrosensitive himself, and he could feel when he had the phone in his hand, he could feel it hot, and then he could obviously put it next to his head. He could, he couldn't stay on the phone and take calls for very long. So he got an easy call, and he sort of knows me, so he sort of was very skeptical of the technology, but sort of had enough trust in me to try it, and he was pleasantly surprised. And he's actually given us a great testimonial that we've got on the website, where he talks about how he wasn't expecting to notice a difference, and yet within 10 minutes, sort of the fogginess of his brain went, and he said symptoms from handling the mobile phone pretty well disappeared as well. So he's very happy, and we sort of get fairly regular feedback from people who will often maybe have got one symptom in mind that they think may be being caused by the EMFs, but then once they've got the technology, they suddenly realize actually there was 2 or 3 other ways that they weren't recognizing it that have resolved as a result. So as I say, a lot of the symptoms are fairly non-specific and are often blamed on stress and modern life, everything but the EMFs. And it's just simply because we can't see them, and we mostly can't detect them directly unless they're very close to us. The mobile phone's heating someone's head. On the whole, we just aren't really that much aware of how much they are, unless maybe you're in the city and you're in a new area and you're trying to log on to your Wi-Fi. You call up to try and connect, and you suddenly see that you've got a choice of 20 different Wi-Fi signals that you can latch onto. So there's quite a big difference between towns and cities and the countryside in terms of overlap and distance between people. And obviously in the cities, different mobile phone carriers have all got masts there because they're trying to get they want to cover large amounts of population rather than large amounts of the country, and they can do that most efficiently in cities. So you end up then with a lot of crossover from mobile phone providers, but also a lot of crossover from Wi-Fi. And then they've all got their own hotspots as well, so that people who aren't on a specific provider, they provide free Wi-Fi for people who want to have connectivity, if where they perhaps otherwise wouldn't necessarily have one. So those sort of built up areas will have much higher levels of electromagnetic radiation than people living in the countryside as a result.
Could you tell us about any more case studies or test studies on animals or people?
If you I mean, one of the things that attracted me to Comosystems and the CMO technology was the amount of research that's been done. And they basically, they did research quite a while back now, but they did it for over 10 years. And all those research results have been published. Or presented at conferences. So, it's all been peer reviewed and checked over by, in cases, double-blind studies. So one of the ones which was quite interesting was a large study that was done in a workplace, and there was nearly something like 1,000 people in this workplace, and they did it as a double-blind. So they had some genuine CMO technology, but they also had some sham ones as well. And what they found was there was a 30% reduction in non-specific stress signals from people in the work situation. So, when there's a large test number, like that, and we've got that amount of reduction in symptoms, that's, we can't blame that on placebo. It's, there's some definite effects there as well. There's another interesting one. Obviously, a lot of these experiments are done on insects or animals. And there's been a couple of interesting ones done on insects. There was one done on ants, where they had a colony of ants in a laboratory situation, and they put some food on the other side of a sort of container, really. And then the ants obviously were going backwards and forwards to the food source. But if they put a Wi-Fi router close by to the ants, then they started staggering around. Some of them fell over, were completely disabled by it. Others they didn't do a straight line. They started being obviously disrupted, but their navigation wasn't quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And then we put CMO technology by the router, then the ants returned to normal functioning. So that was a good one. That shows, again, no placebo effect on the ants. They didn't know what was affecting them and what was mitigating for them. And there was another one which was interesting, done on eggs, looking at embryos in eggs. And in this one, the interesting one for this was they had obviously a group where they were exposed to the EMFs. They had the group where there was no EMFs at all. They had another group where they had the EMFs and the CMO, and then there was a fourth group which was where they had the EMFs and shielding. And it was interesting because in the control group and there was just no EMFs or anything, and there's something like a 20% mortality of the embryos in the eggs. And then when they gave put the EMFs in, the mortality went up to about 60%. And if they added the CMO technology in, it dropped back down to 20 again. But the really interesting one was the shielding, and it went up to 80%. And what that showed was there are natural electromagnetic radiation fields that we need. It's part of our health. And so actually cutting out and trying to shield totally electromagnetic radiation it sounds like it's going to be a great solution, but actually it isn't, because we need those influences on us to be healthy. So, we want to mitigate for the harmful ones, but we want to let the natural electromagnetic radiation that actually benefits us, we don't want to interfere with those either. So, shielding isn't everything it sounds it's going to be. And the other thing that sometimes happens with shielding is if for example, someone puts a shielding device on a mobile phone, if it's truly shielding, they won't be able to use the mobile phone. If it's shielding, I don't know, for example, 80 or 90% of the signal, well, you think, well, that's okay. But actually what happens is the mobile phone will detect that it's not got a very good connectivity. And so it will power up to try and get a better connection. And so what you're doing is you're then generating more EMFs in the phone itself, which is then the opposite of what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
And the other aspect of that is, as I was saying earlier, the body isn't a linear system. So just because you cut out 80 or 90% of the electromagnetic radiation doesn't necessarily mean that the 10% or the 20% that gets through isn't sufficient to cause biological changes, which then get amplified up, as we were talking about before. So, it's important to use technology which is proven, and proven on a biological level in terms of biological markers, because ultimately that's what we're trying to achieve for ourselves. There are things that will claim that they alter the signal. Well, they may alter the signal, but how does that affect how they affect the body? If the work hasn't been done to show that the biological markers are brought back into line, then it doesn't matter if you change the signal, but if it's still causing the damage, what have you actually achieved?
Exactly.
So, I wouldn't dare say that CMO is the only way to do it, but as far as I'm aware, it is the only company which has done the level of testing to prove that their technology works in the way that they say it does, and that it does the job. And that for me was really what was so important for me to get involved with the company, was that fact, really. And if there are other ways of dealing with it, that's fine, but then go and prove it, get it published, do the work, because people can't afford to gamble with their health at the level that we're having to, talk about gambling with, in the current situation, certainly with 5G coming on board and this sort of massive step up potentially in electromagnetic radiation.
Absolutely. I think you made some really, really interesting points there. Um, it's the effects, it's the biological effects on the body that count rather than actually worrying about shielding the EMFs themselves. It's the effects on the body that matter. And as long as they're compensated for and that the body is harmonized, that is what counts here. And that's what makes a difference. And you're right, Comosystems is not the be all and end all of everything, but it's certainly a product that is absolutely there in the market that can really help and protect people, and something that I would really encourage people to invest in, especially for children and especially for the home. Um, Speaking of which, you also have a Safer Schools project going on.
Yeah.
Could you tell us more about that and what the involvement is with that?
Okay. Well, basically, we took the view that obviously, there's a lot of technology now being put into classes. There's various so instead of having blackboards when I was at school, we've got screens and things and laptops and tablets and all the rest of it. So, and it's very, it's right that children aren't disadvantaged by not having technology, because when we go into the workplace, we've got to be able to use technology, absolutely. But obviously we do know that children are more susceptible to EMFs because they're growing more rapidly, so their DNA is more at risk from damage, and because they're that much smaller, the electromagnetic radiation penetrates proportionally further into their body. So that's why children and babies especially are susceptible. It's partly a size thing, but it's also the fact that they're growing. And so we took the view that, okay, schools are using this technology. It's important that it goes into the schools, but schools on the whole don't have the funding to buy it. They're already saying that they don't have enough money for some of the more, the basic equipment and books and things that they already need. And also the other aspect of it is, kids are in school during the day, but actually they're sleeping 8 hours at home and they're spending other time at home as well. So actually they need protection in the home as much as, or more than they need it actually in the school too. So we basically took a view that if the schools contact us, we can talk to them, and we will allow them to buy the CMO technology at a heavily discounted price, so that the school is protected as cheaply as we can possibly do it. But also if they promote it to the parents, so that the kids are being protected at home as well, then we will give a discount code to the school, which they can pass on so that parents can buy it slightly more cheaply. But also it generates some money for the school that they can then use to buy some products. And if a lot of parents take it on board, then they'll have more than enough money to buy the CMO technology, but they might have enough money to buy other equipment and things that they need for the school as well. So the idea is we try and make it a win-win-win situation as much as possible, and also because at the end of the day, the children are the next generation, and they don't need behavioral disruption in school. They don't need the damage that can happen. I think we're sort of seeing now, after lockdown, people are going back to school, and there's all of a sudden there's masts appearing on school grounds or very close to school grounds, which is causing consternation, and people are worried about it quite rightly and quite naturally. So there's a way that there's a solution to the problem that is relatively easy to initiate and put in. And the other thing, obviously, we're talking about in kids, because their cells are rapidly growing and dividing, because they're growing, of course, for adults and teenagers, putting mobile phones in pockets is affecting fertility for men and women, and obviously younger generations. Infertility is becoming a real issue.
Absolutely.
There are all sorts of reasons and ramifications for looking at this EMF technology and mitigating for it. If we want to try and maintain our health as best as we can.
Absolutely. And if you look at most children or teenagers, children nowadays are having mobile phones available to them at the age of, what is it, 5 or 6? Little
I think
children
it's
have
getting lower
mobile.
down these days. Yeah,
Yeah. So by the time you're like 5 or 6 years old, uh, by the time your child is 5 or 6 year old, you give them a mobile phone. Some parents give them an iPad or some sort of tablet, so they're being exposed all the time at home. That's absolutely for sure. And then when they go to school, you're right, the days of blackboards and chalk and all that is gone. It's all projector screens and white screens, so there's a lot of blue screen, a lot of radiation being emitted
yeah,
from those devices, and there's zero protection. And I think the main issue around all of this is education. I think the more we educate people, and that's the whole purpose of this interview, the more we educate people about Comosystems and the technology and how we can mitigate all of this, this can then trickle down to the schools, to the parents, to the children, who can then learn to take certain steps to protect themselves. And one of those steps is to buy one of these products to help counter the effects of EMFs, which are so dangerous, so
yeah.
harmful.
I mean, one of the things we talked there about, tablets and kids watching films and all the rest of it. One of the areas where I see it makes me cringe is when some of the cars now have got you know, screens built into the headrests of the
Yeah.
driver's car so that the kids in the back can watch. And you think, gosh, that radiation is right behind the driver's head, right going into their brain. And yet,
Yeah.
if they're going on long journeys, well, any journey, it's not good, but long journeys, and they're being expected to concentrate and make quick decisions, maybe, if they're getting headaches or feeling inflammation as a result, or it's affecting their eyesight, giving them tired eyes, that's not a good driving situation to be in. So we really need to start thinking about where we're using this technology. And I mean, some of the suggestions I've seen for smart devices for the future too, as well, is you just think, oh, smart pajamas. Like, no, there's one place where smart technology is not required, is in the
Absolutely.
bedroom.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If people wanted to, could they put a Harmony in their car, a small one?
Yeah, absolutely. A small harmony in the in the car, or a couple of strategically placed travelers will yeah. I mean, one harmony would probably be sufficient, but if you've got it, if you yeah.
The reason I'm asking is because you mentioned about the Bluetooth and the hands-free and everything like that, but also, uh, more importantly, we now have this advent of electric cars.
Yeah.
So
And going onto autonomous cars, and you can imagine the
yeah,
amount of sensors and things that are going to
exactly. You are literally sitting in an electromagnetic field in an electric car.
yeah, big electro smog. Absolutely.
So for those who do have electric cars, they could they could purchase a Harmony, or
Yeah.
certainly get a Traveller for themselves, and that should help mitigate the effects of all those things. And it just seems to be that electric cars and things like these are becoming more and more mainstream now. And because the price of fuel and petrol and diesel and everything going up, people and the government are encouraging people to invest in electric cars. It's becoming more and more of a reality we see on the
Yes.
roads. So
Yeah, and just reducing the pollution. We're sort of we're reducing the fossil fuel pollution, but we're massively increasing the electromagnetic pollution. As a counter
exactly,
to that.
yeah. So um, as a vet, Roger, um, if we can just go into more case studies that you might be aware of that involve plants or birds that you can tell us about, that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of focus a bit so far on the effects that EMFs have on people, but obviously they're going to affect pets in people's homes as well. But there have been and a lot of the research obviously is done on animals. So we know that the electromagnetic radiation is not just affecting people, but it's also affecting animals and as well. And there's been some stories where trees and plants that are close to some of the masts have showed signs of radiation damage, I suppose, close by to these masts, because they aren't subjected to any sort of distance protocol. And so what tends to happen is they get damage on the side of the plant or the tree that's closest to the mast, and then as the health of the plant and the tree deteriorates, then they get more unhealthy throughout the whole plant. And there have been some wildlife studies done. There's been quite a lot of concern about the decline in birds, and of course migratory birds are using magnetoreception for working out how to do their journeys where they go south for the winter, and their migrations. And so they've have been some studies looking at birds, and obviously they don't understand the frequencies in the same way and the potential harm that they do. And they discovered that some birds that were nesting within 200 meters of a tetramast they looked at, and they found basically they found it very difficult to build nests. There was sort of bickering, if you like, between the couples within the pairs. The birds often pair up and nest. And then they found that these birds within this 200 meters of these masts produced 0 live chicks at the end of them. So, fertility was massively affected. And of course, we're seeing these sorts of issues in people. Infertility is a big problem in people. And you can argue that, in cities where there's lots of masts and lots of EMFs, we can, say maybe there's more antisocial behavior, and maybe some of it is down to circumstances, but maybe there's an element of it where EMFs may be creating some sort of effects on behavior too. So there is evidence that there are other things.
Are you aware of actual studies that have been done on the psychological behavior of humans within range of EMFs?
Yeah, they've looked at the effect of EMFs on children, and they have decided that they have an impact on ADHD. There's also been some links to show, because the electromagnetic radiation can affect the permeability of the blood-brain barrier, it allows heavy metals and inflammation to pass into the brain, and they think this is one of the potential causes of autism in babies where they've been born with autism, as well as obviously can acquire it in early life as well.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Roger, for your time. I think it's been an extremely interesting interview. If anybody is interested to know more about your products, or indeed wants to buy anything, ourselves, Health Paradigm, we sell your full range of products. So harmonies, small harmonies, large harmonies, travelers, the devices for the phone and the laptop. We sell all of them.
Busy zones, yeah. You've got them all. Yeah.
So if anybody's interested, you can go to our website, which is healthparadigm.co.uk. And if you want to go directly to Comosystems to find out more information, you could, and that's comosystems.co.uk. And you can learn there's some very, very interesting articles on that website as well, if anybody wants to research this subject more thoroughly. But thank you again, Roger. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you, Jana. Thank you.